Hi, welcome everyone. Let me tell you, you are in for a great discussion today. We wanted to kick off today's webinar on the State of Talent Acquisition Technology 2021 Trends by welcoming you to the series. I have been given the honor of kicking us off today, but I'm like the wind. You can hear me, but you can't see me. I wanted to pop in to welcome you all to this great discussion on 2021 TA Tech Trends. You are listening to episode 6 of Verified First HR at the Table series. In each episode, we interview HR leaders like you, and we dig in to uncover HR concepts, tips, and strategies. From speakers like you, we have compiled so many great ideas, insights, and resources to best support our HR community. We are always looking for great speakers to interview, so if you're interested, get in contact with us after this webinar. If you ever want to recap the event or study up on some additional input based on insight from these discussions, check out our blog page where we deep dive into all of our HR at the Table topics. So far, we've discussed the reinvention of HR, CEO and HR alignment, the intersection of HR tech and work, maximizing brand, tech, and talent for return, the role of culture when added in the talent and tech mix, and today we're meeting with industry-leading analyst and founder of Aptitude Research, Madeline Laurano, to discuss talent acquisition technology in today's market. We have some great webinars planned for the rest of this year, so if you enjoyed this one, make sure to mark your calendars for our next events and keep up to date on topics we're talking about. If you have attended those previous HR at the Table episodes I mentioned, let us know. For everyone attending the live recording, test out that chat functionality by telling us which webinars you've attended and what stuck with you. If you haven't attended one of these webinars before, you can still test out your chat functionality by letting us know where you're calling from or even what the weather is like for you today. So without further ado, I will kick us off by saying hello and welcome to another podcast-style webinar episode of HR at the Table, where Ben Cornett at Verified First talks with HR and talent acquisition leaders from some of America's most notable companies about their roles at the executive table. Before we jump in, I want to address some housekeeping items. Remember that chat functionality we all have tested out? Use it. We would love to hear the questions you have from today's discussions, and we'll answer as many as we can throughout the webinar and at the end. Bonus for our live attendees today, if you would like to receive one SHRM and/or HRCI credit for today, stay until the very end of the webinar for our post-webinar survey. This will pop up directly on your screen and will include information on how to redeem your credit. For any of our on-demand listeners today, check your email for instructions on how to redeem your credit. FYI, this webinar is being recorded, so you can use it as a resource and watch it whenever you want. Now that we've gotten the housekeeping items out of the way, take it away, Ben.
Thank you. Hello, good afternoon, good morning, I guess maybe for some, good evening. My name is Ben Cornett. I'm your host for today's interview, and Madeline is here with me. So good morning, I guess good afternoon there in Boston, Madeline.
Thanks, Ben. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to chat. And as you know, our nice little intro voice in the wind mentioned, you know, we are obviously really excited to talk with you as the one of the leading analysts in the industry when it comes to HR and talent acquisition. So thank you for taking your time to chat with me today, and hopefully we have a good conversation, brings a lot of value to everyone that joined us.
Thanks. It's been quite a year in talent acquisition, so I'm sure we'll have lots to talk about in the hour. And we coordinated outfits too for anyone that's watching us here.
That was not on purpose, I promise. But I guess good minds think alike. You know, I'm a blue person, and there's more to that story down the road, Madeline. But before we get going with some of our questions today, I just want to first call out and thank our sponsors for today's HR at the Table, both iCIMS and Skill Survey, for stepping up and sponsoring our HR at the Table for this event. And really excited for us to talk about the state of talent acquisition tech, the 2021 trends. And Madeline, maybe before we really get rolling too far, do you want to tell everyone a little bit about Aptitude Research and what, you know, obviously you're the founder there, so we know how that happened, but maybe a little bit about your experience in the space and industry?
Sure, thanks, Ben. So hi, everyone. I am the founder of Aptitude Research, as Ben said. We are a research and advisory firm focused on HCM. My area of expertise, if you will, has been talent acquisition for about 2 decades, which is a very long time to be covering this space, but there's been a lot of change in this market. I've seen a lot happen with technology and this evolution that we're seeing today. So I'm excited to be sharing some of the research, and Ben and I worked on a report together, so we're going to be talking about that as well.
Yeah, and you know, reports are always good, but I think it's good to set a foundation of the report. Maybe if you don't mind, Madeline, walk us through a little bit of methodology that went into the research that we performed together.
Yeah, absolutely. So we did a combination of qualitative research and quantitative research through a lot of interviews with TA leaders at different organizations and different industries. And we combine that with a survey that we do in talent acquisition to really look at buying behavior, really look at the trends in this market, really look at what companies are seeing with the technology that they're using and how this TA tech stack is evolving. So it's that combination, Ben, of these interviews with companies and these conversations that continue to happen with that survey data. And lots of demos too. I mean, I think one thing we both see, you from the partnership perspective and me from this analyst perspective, is we get to see a lot of different technology solutions out there in the market. We're able to demo them. We're able to see what companies think about them. So it's really that combination of those three things that led us to this research project.
Yeah, and I'm really excited. This is the second report that we produced with Madeline, and you know, it's been really good working together. And kind of why we do this at Verified First is to bring that third-party angle and really get a good, I think, fingerprint, if you will, of what the market's doing, right, in talent acquisition. As we sponsor that event, we're of course looking to next year's report as well. But it's interesting, just so our audience doesn't kind of, hey, I want a copy of this report. It will be available in the chat. So as Brianna mentioned, or our voice in the wind, I should say, as she mentioned at the very beginning, is make sure you follow the chat, engage with us. We will be taking questions live as we go through this, so we really want to make this as interactive as possible. Maybe, you know, when we did this report, and you know, as a third party, of course, the expert of the research, I should say, Madeline, what were some of the key technology trends that came as a result of the report?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we obviously talk a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion in talent acquisition today, and that was a major trend within the research and through these conversations, as it should be. And I think for a lot of companies are still figuring out what does technology do to help them with their diversity goals within talent acquisition. And you know, I'm interested to see when we kind of continue to do this report where we're at next year with this, because it's a priority for every organization. It's driving a lot of decisions today, yet I think there isn't a lot of clarity around, you know, how we're thinking about reducing bias and offering this inclusive experience. So that was a big theme and trend in the research report. You know, we also looked at the ATS is not enough. And I think this is something, Ben, we've talked a lot about, is the traditional definition of the ATS, which is just a workflow, just used to track the applicant through the process. That's not enough anymore. We need to be able to engage with candidates before they apply. We need to think about the onboarding experience. And then there's a whole ecosystem of communication and background screening and assessments that really help to fuel talent acquisition today. So for companies that have just had this laser focus on the ATS, that's really proved to be not enough today. You know, and thinking about that ecosystem and thinking about the ATS, another trend, Ben, we've talked a lot about is integration. And right. Integration is so important, but we often don't talk about that as trends. It's not exciting, it's not new, but it's probably the most critical thing companies can think about when they're looking at their TA tech stack today.
Yeah, that's true. I remember it's kind of funny that, you know, integration becomes a top of mind issue. And the reality is a lot of people, I think in the report, talk about integration, and then the fact that just kind of surprises me that ROI isn't always tracked. We had a roundtable discussion last week with Chris Corneen and I don't know, about 10 or 15 top CHROs in the country, and ROI is still an issue and still being tracked, which also came out in reports when you're thinking about technology, that integration, and what kind of money that can save in the workflow. So really interesting research. Was there anything in the report this year, Madeline, that stood out or was a significant change from as we did the report last time?
You know, efficiency is just this topic within talent acquisition that has always been there. And I think we think about time to fill. What's the time to fill a position? This is what talent acquisition and HR has always tracked. And, you know, we're familiar with that metric. But I think for a period of time, and I'm guilty of this, we got into this habit of talking about it like it was negative. Like we should not be focused on time to fill. That's not important. Efficiency is not as important as quality. or effectiveness. And that's really flipped this year. And in the research report, you'll see that's a key driver for technology decisions. It certainly came up in a lot of those conversations we had. And efficiency is driving these decisions because companies had to adapt and adjust overnight. I mean, if you think about what all of you have had to go through in such a short period of time, moving to remote recruitment, thinking about all the priorities that are important to your business through change and how recruitment was going to align with that, that's an overnight adjustment, and efficiency becomes really important in that type of situation. And that really came through in the research and in that report, is that this is so critical. It's impacting recruiter productivity, and it impacts the candidate experience as well. Like, it's almost not just through the employer lens, but candidates want to move along quickly so they know what's next, so they have a job, so they can receive that communication that they don't have a job and they can look elsewhere. So that efficiency was really surprising in the research. Internal mobility was a huge theme. I think probably not so surprising, but it's a big difference from when we did the report last time, as this is what companies were talking about as hiring slowed down a little bit, hiring changed. We start to always focus on our internal candidates in those situations.
Yeah, and we heard that in our, it's kind of interesting. We heard that in January when we interviewed Elizabeth Varghese with IBM, is really being able to change, almost upskill your employees that you currently have to be able to reposition them within the organization in that mobility. So really interesting. But from a talent acquisition perspective, time to hire, it seems to me that it's more critical now than ever. Everywhere I go, there's openings, right? What are some things you're hearing currently? I mean, this has been a little while since we did the report, and those efficiencies and time to hire, has that changed, or do you think that's accelerated now that it seems like hiring is starting to pick back up?
I think it's absolutely accelerated. And I mean, we saw during the pandemic, right, these organizations in high volume like CVS and Walmart and Amazon having to say, and McDonald's having to say, we can't hire in 2 weeks, we have to hire in 2 days. We need people in 2 days. And that's a tremendous shift. But I think we're seeing that in every organization now, in every industry. It's saying we have these incredible goals within talent acquisition now that just have happened overnight. We need to be able to move quickly, and efficiency's got to be a big part of that. And solutions that are simple and they provide that efficiency are really those that are attracting a lot of companies today. And that's been a big theme. I think, Ben, along with that, there's the whole issue of recruiter burnout. And this is something we really weren't talking about 2 years ago either. It was just ignored. It's like the business doesn't really understand what recruiters do. They don't know the day-to-day. Candidates don't really understand it as well. And we just focus on what are the priorities for the company, what are the priorities for the candidate experience. And this whole recruiter role has been pretty neglected from conversations in talent acquisition. And that's shifted as well. It's recruiters are overwhelmed. They are feeling that burnout. They're working harder than they ever have before. These are 80-hour weeks for a lot of recruiters. And we need to be able to recognize that and acknowledge what an amazing profession this is and how amazing, these individuals are. And I think we're just starting to see companies say, we have to pay attention to this, and we need solutions that are going to lift that administrative burden and help recruiters do their job in a way that they're going to have some better work-life balance as well.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where the technology piece comes in, right? In the TA, talent acquisition technology realm, it's really about matching your systems to get the max out of them. And we talked a little bit last year about how the applicant tracking system just isn't enough by itself. The research, I think, still showed a trend. What's this really mean? When you think about TA tech stack, what's it really mean for our audience of making sure our TA tech stack has all the resources to alleviate that recruiter? Because you're right, they're going to be tired, especially with what's going on in the market right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the ATSs have done a great job of expanding their capabilities and their offerings and their partnerships. And that's been really exciting to watch. I think for anyone that's kind of figuring out their TA tech stack today, if you look at what you have in place, and it might just be an ATS and maybe some job boards or maybe some background screening, you have to really look at what's happening in this candidate journey. What are recruiters dealing with on a day-to-day basis? Are you able to automate any of that through your current technology And I think what a lot of companies see is we need more. We need something that engages with candidates even before they apply. That could come from a CRM, a recruitment marketing platform, some type of talent pipelining solution. So you're able to build relationships and a stronger employer brand even before someone's applied for a job. That's what we expect as consumers, right, Ben? It's like I'm not going to go and get in my car and go to the mall, even today, especially today in a pandemic, unless I've done my research. I know what stores are there. I know what I need. I know what they're selling. I've checked out their website. The same thing's happening with applying for a job too. Candidates are doing their research and they want to know. So we have to be able to engage with them before that happens. And that typically doesn't come from the ATS. And then on the other side, we have to onboard. We have to make sure that if somebody's joining, especially in a remote environment, they're going to be able to feel part of the company culture. Their forms are going to be in place. The tasks are going to be in place. And we have to think about that. And within that, there's all these areas with communication and screening and assessing candidates. And AI matching has been a big topic. We have to think about what does that ecosystem look like for our organization.
Right. And obviously COVID probably accelerated some of this for a lot of organizations, that hadn't been thinking about, technology and bringing it all together to accelerate their hiring process. What did the study find this year when it related to some of the external factors such as COVID and the emphasis in integration in all these solutions? So you can have all these platforms and they're great, but if they don't talk to one another, it's probably not so effective.
Yeah, it's tremendous pressure for an organization. You get excited for new technology, you make this investment, and then it doesn't integrate. And that's felt by the TA team, having gone through that process, now feeling all this frustration internally. What we found in our research is 1 in 2 companies aren't even thinking about integration before they start to evaluate providers. That's when you can ask those questions. What integrations are in place? What does integration look like? Who owns the APIs? What type of APIs? Is there a Chrome extension? Like what is this provider and these providers doing to help support you with those integrations? And you can start asking those questions even before you start to evaluate providers, which is when you should be doing it. What happens when you do it after is you kind of get in a situation where you're not able to integrate certain things. You're asking IT more and more, picking up the phone and saying, we need your help, and IT's pushing back and saying, we'll do it at the end of the year. And that can be incredibly frustrating when you want to be able to get the most out of that technology immediately. So integration, I think, has been more of a frustration this year. I think the other thing that I see with that too, Ben, is that because of Zoom and because of all of these calls that companies are doing and global companies are doing when they've got dispersed workforce, is IT's more involved in the decision making. Because as you go through the evaluation and you go through this, IT can come on, they can join a Zoom call for 15 minutes, they can join a Zoom call for an hour. They don't need to be in a room for 2 weeks to fly in to wherever it is. And they're more involved, they're able to say what they need during that evaluation process. And I think for a lot of companies, and in the industry, we talk about that as if it's negative. And I think it's actually positive. I think it's a positive thing to be able to understand what IT expects, and can we align on this and collaborate on this very early in the process. I think it tends to work better.
Yeah, I think you're right. When you think about the integration and being important, a lot of organizations don't engage their IT team. They take it on their own because roadmaps are complicated or they're long, or the integration is complicated. It takes maybe 6 months. There's a lot of factors that go into that. So really engaging your team on the on the IT team is really, really important. It's also interesting, Madeline, that I just attended a Forrester kind of marketing report, and it's also indicating executives are getting more involved in the decision making as well. In the past, you might be a CHRO, head of HR. Other executive leaders are being involved in the organization technology decisions, which I think is really intriguing. I'm hoping they're asking the question about. I really hope they're asking a question about integration. We've been running this survey for, I think, almost 7 months now, coming up on 7 months. And I just want to pull the audience real quick. We've got a question for our audience. And remembering the audience, the chat is open, questions is open. I do see a chat from, I believe it's Frank, asking if you get a copy of the webinar. Yes. And also he said hi to the window lady. So that's kind of interesting. But let's do a quick survey now that we talked a little bit about the key trends. I'm going to pop a survey on the screen here, so give me a second. Let's go ahead and get this going. For our audience, what areas of technology are you looking to replace in the next 6 months? And there's obviously a few options, and you can select more than one. Take a moment, and that should be coming up here any second now. So we'll let this run for a few minutes here, Madeline. You know, we've been looking at this kind of question, I think, in this report at least for 3 years now. Any surprise if no replacements came up as a top priority?
Yeah, I mean, I see a lot of replacement. I just see a tremendous amount of investment in TA tech this year. And I think maybe that's surprising to companies too. You think about a pandemic and you think about change and you think about hiring slowing down, that tends to, you know, maybe make the investment in technology stop. And that really has not been the case. You know, we saw 1 in 4 companies increase their investment. 44% of companies invested in new technology during the pandemic. You know, this is just something that companies need, especially in a remote environment. We see a lot of replacement with the ATS and CRM, and I'm very curious to see what the poll results are, Ben.
Yeah, we'll give it just another minute here. It's really interesting. So we've been tracking this along a period of time, and you know, we'll see how close the results are. And obviously, we're going to publish a final report at the end of the year. Every month we go through and share this question with our audience, really to understand what's going on in the market. So let me just close this real quick. We'll give everyone just another like 5 seconds. Go take your time, vote. About half of you have voted already. So we'll close this up here. So let me share the results. That should be coming up here soon. Love technology when it works. Love technology when it doesn't work too. Sometimes that's the case. So here's our results. I think those should come up on your screen. Any big things to call out that you find surprising compared to the previous research we've done, Madeline, here?
I mean, I think it's great to see 45% of companies are not replacing, which I think is an indication of things are working, hopefully, and you know that's been in place. You know, to see the ATS and CRM, that was my suspicion as well, that we'd see a lot of replacement there, and that certainly aligns with the research that we've done at Aptitude as well. So, you know, it's interesting, and when we ask companies why, like what would make a company want to replace their solution, you know, Ben, it often doesn't come down to price. It's coming down to customer success and partnership. And I think that's really interesting too. You know, we're not just looking at what's cheaper, where can we get the best deal. We're looking at, okay, we really need partnership today. That's a huge priority within TA Tech. And are we going to have the customer success team that we need? Do we like this product roadmap? Does it align with where we want to go? And all of those components of partnership are driving those decisions on replacement.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting. Again, Frank, thanks for the engagement and our questions. You know, Frank made the, maybe we should ask the question a little bit differently in our research is, you know, what are companies looking at as far as adding to their tech stack? We don't ask that question, I think. So maybe a good question in our future report to look at is, okay, replacement's one thing. What about adding to your tech stack? Maybe you have an ATS and you have a couple job boards. What's missing? And maybe we can start painting a picture of some of those things that might be missing. So
great idea. Great discussion.
Yeah, definitely. So obviously there's some people thinking in the next 6 months, quite a few actually, looking at, you know, replacing some of their technology, and maybe let's pivot a little bit and talk about that. In late 2020, Madeline, you kind of, I don't know, predicted is the right word, some of the challenges they would have as they come into COVID. You know, we were in the midst of COVID. But I'd love to talk a little bit about, do you think HR technology is still too complex, and how do we simplify that?
Yeah, I think kind of looking at where we're at today versus where we were at last year when we were kind of starting this project, you know, the interesting thing is not everybody's ready to go back to a work environment. And I don't know if we would have predicted that or knew that those feelings might last as long as they have. I think people are worried about safety. They're worried about childcare issues. You know, I've got 2 kids at home. That certainly, I like working from home now. And I think when candidates are in that situation where do I work? Do I need to work? You know, what are my options? That real fear or reality or whatever you want to call it of going back into an office is something that they're considering. That's a big part of the candidate's decision. And, I think companies have to kind of figure that piece out. Do we have a hybrid model? Are we expecting candidates to come back? Is there a time where we're going to communicate that? And, I think that that's kind of been a work in progress, but it definitely impacts how candidates are making decisions and what that recruitment process looks like. I mean, you even see there's different studies out there, but it's 2.2 million women, I think was reported, have actually left the workforce. What does that mean? Are there returnship programs that companies are thinking about? Are there more contract opportunities, contingent workforce opportunities for women to be able to stay part of the workforce? And then I think the remote piece is still, something that within all of that, we're still dealing with technology. I think a lot of companies did a Band-Aid approach. Like, we need something now. We are now staying home. It's March 2020. It's April 2020. We have to interview X number of candidates, and we need to figure out a video interview system. We need an onboarding process because we don't know when people are going to actually go through an orientation that we typically do in Dallas every year. So they put a Band-Aid approach in place, and now it's like, okay, we're going to be in a different situation for a while. What does the long term, what does the future look like? What are the technology solutions that can support that? Campus recruiting is a big topic too. Companies are trying to figure that out. We have moved to virtual events last year, and it worked for a lot of companies. I think a lot of early talent liked them as well. They prefer the one-on-one time than just walking around in a career fair. So to be able to think about, what does that future look like? Do we go to our tier 1 schools? Do we reevaluate how we kind of conduct the campus? I mean, I think that's a perfect example of kind of where we're at today.
Yeah, it's interesting. It kind of leads into the next question I have, is kind of painting the picture of the new role of a recruiter, in the talent acquisition world. What does that look like? You can see I'm here at the office. We are kind of going that hybrid that you mentioned, Madeline. At least our team is going to work a couple days a week at the office. The rest, the rest of the teams got their own schedules. But it's really, really interesting. You think about that role of the recruiter today. Obviously the role shifted a ton since last year. What's it look like a year from now?
Yeah, I think we're going to see more specialist roles included in the TA function. Capabilities like digital specialists, data scientists, to be part of that TA function. And that could be the role of the recruiter, kind of building those capabilities through training, through workshops, or it could be dedicated roles that are brought into the TA function for that. Digital specialists, especially with a remote environment and with thinking about attracting candidates today in a very competitive world, can bring a lot of value to organization. Recruitment ops has been a big role too, Ben, and I think that that's something that was starting before the pandemic. We started to see recruitment ops playing a role in technology decisions and kind of figuring out the integration piece. And we're seeing that I think we're gonna see that more and more. I think that's gonna be a critical capability within the role of the recruiter, but in a TA function as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's really interesting, when we talk about, now we got all these challenges we have and these new investments in technology. And one of the findings on the report, the Talent Acquisition Buyer's Guide that we produced, was the idea that companies are struggling with measure ROI. Maybe talk us a little bit through the finding in the report, and then maybe give our audience some ideas of how they can go about measuring return for their investments in these new technologies and new workflows for their talent acquisition teams.
Yes, it was so interesting because we found, I think it was 1 in 2 companies aren't measuring the ROI at all of their TA tech investment. So if you think about everything that goes into that, whether you go to RFP or not, you're making an investment in a solution that you hope will do X, Y, and Z. And then you look to a year later, 2 years later, and you haven't measured the value of that. And that can be a really challenging place to be in. You might be getting questions internally. You might be frustrated with kind of how things are playing out. ROI can feel difficult to do, right? It feels overwhelming. And then if you're kind of thinking about it a year, 2 years later, it feels even more overwhelming, something we push off. What we found in the research and through conversations with companies is if you think about it early, you're really able to see those results, but you're also able to create a system where you're measuring that ROI regularly, and it becomes easy to do. So, what our recommendation is to think about ROI early. You can work with the providers that you're looking at, work with the providers you're using. They tend to have an ROI model that you can use, and you can kind of use as a starting place. But think about it before you've made that investment. So that's my first kind of recommendation there. The second is, if it feels overwhelming and you're not a math person and you don't want to come up with a calculation, just do 3 things. Take note of the benefits, start to write them down. What would you like to see in a new technology solution? What would those benefits be? Better candidate experience, efficiency we talked about, diversity goals. What would be those benefits you'd like to see from new technology? And just start to write them down. Start to ask key stakeholders. We talked about IT being more involved, the executives being more involved. Ask what they would like to see in recruitment technology, and start to take note. We talk about it as journaling, and I don't mean Dear Diary, but just take of what those benefits are, and do the same. And so the second piece is do the same thing for costs. What kind of cost can you expect? Is it going to be one-time costs, annual costs? Are there add-ons? A lot of technology providers are adding in premium services and all these little add-ons. Start to take note of what all these costs could possibly be. And then the final piece to just take note of is, when would you like to see ROI? Maybe you don't have to wait a year. Maybe it's 3 months when you can start to see that return on your investment. And if you just start there, just take note, just get curious, you'll be able to kind of come up with a model where you're able to report back. ROI is not perfect, and there's no, kind of wrong, right way to think about it. It's something you're going to continue to revisit, but I think that gives you a good starting place.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good advice. And I really appreciate the 3 items, and, think of cost all the time. I think one thing that's often missed is thinking about even a cost of staff to maintain a system, right? A lot of times, at least in the world I live in, a lot of times we think about the benefits the platform brings to us, but we don't think about the maintenance cost, and sometimes that gets mixed. I think also, just to remind our audience, feel free to ask your questions in the chat. If you're going to ask any guru any questions, Madeline is your guru, so take advantage of that. And if she doesn't know the answer, she'll be honest. She'll say, I don't know, that's a really good question, let me get back to you. But I think as we talk a little bit more about ROI, what have you found, Madeline, in maybe meeting with some of the senior HR leaders across the country? What are they looking for when it comes to communicating ROI to them? So if I'm a director of talent acquisition and I need to communicate up chain to my CEO, what kind of concerns do they have? What matters to them when trying to communicate ROI?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think the first step is finding out what those company goals are. Like, what are those priorities? You can do that when you're kind of thinking through the benefits and you're asking questions and getting curious and talking to different stakeholders and executives on what they'd like to see. And I can say kind of very broadly, just based on the conversations we've had and the research that we've had, diversity, equity, and inclusion is so important, and it should be so important. And if you don't really have a way to think about that within hiring and within talent acquisition, and you're not really sure what role technology plays with that, I'd say become a champion for that. Really figure out, what's important to your organization, what role technology plays or does not play, or might have a negative effect on your diversity goals, and start to really think about what could you start to show there, what could you start to report on, what can you see that would benefit your organization and benefit those goals that you have. That's certainly a priority for every organization, or it should be. Efficiency, again, we talked about that. I mean, you can start to think about the different components of efficiency. It's time to fill is an easy one, because we always have had a way to do that, and it is what it is. It's a number of days. But you can also think about what's recruiter productivity. Are recruiters spending 16 hours a day scheduling interviews? How can we reduce that? How can we cut that in half? That's a great way to think about, a goal for your company, a goal for ROI. What role does automation play there? So I think, we just found in the research, efficiency and diversity, equity, inclusion are so important. But certainly when you have those conversations, you'll figure out those other priorities as well.
Yeah, it's important to kind of speak their language sometimes. I feel like, our whole purpose of HR at the Table series is to help HR leaders speak the language of their executive leaders, so we can have a better conversation. Because the reality of what COVID has brought to us, of anything in the HRTA space, is a voice. We take care of our employees, we're keeping the organization safe, we're taking action. And now when it's coming to ideas of bringing more staff or bringing staff back or office structure or building location, guess what? HR and talent acquisition has a stake at the table. And so we're really, really excited to see that trend change. Maybe really quick, I think this is a really good question, and thanks for the audience. Jared submitted the following question. And I know, I know when we did this report, Madeline, we kind of focused on the more mid-market to enterprise. So we're looking at 1,000+ employees. But his questions, can we, maybe from an analyst view, maybe you can talk a little bit about the difference between enterprise and SMB to these same challenges we've been talking about.
Yeah, it's a great question. And when we did the report originally, we focused on the SMB. So this year it was more on the enterprise market too. And there's a lot of differences in the resources. So an enterprise organization is going to have these specialist roles. They're going to have a dedicated TA function. There's organizations with 2,000 recruiters on their team, and they're able to kind of put these systems together that an SMB organization is just not going to be able to do. Sometimes the head of TA is also the head of HR and is also the head of finance. So, the resources available are very different. I see a big difference in SMB companies looking at one provider or maybe just a few providers to be able to do everything within talent acquisition, where an enterprise organization tends to have a very complicated TA tech stack. Sometimes the SMB organizations are a little bit more innovative because the technology decisions can happen very quickly. So they're able to get approval for new technology. They're able to look at something that's just simple and automated and be able to provide a better experience, where an enterprise organization sometimes has to wait a year, maybe 18 months to be able to get approval to even, to do that. Frustrating for sales teams at the vendors, I'm sure. So I think those are some major differences. There's, differences in the capabilities. There's obviously a lot of complexity to some of these enterprise solutions with global capability, GDPR compliance, thinking about, all of these very robust workflows that might be in place that a smaller organization just might not need. So, there's kind of pros and cons to both, but oftentimes the innovation sometimes happens at the SMB market, which I think a lot of people don't realize.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's really interesting because it kind of goes, Jason asked a follow-up question. So Jason, thanks for your question. We see AI promoted in marketing across the HR and TA space quite a bit. And his question is really, is it really AI or is it just automation? And I really think, at least my experience with AI in this space is it's really truly using a number of different data points to use computer algorithms to make decisions, right? I don't know if you have any different angle on that or experience, but those computer decisions are really, at the end of the day, automating processes. Any different comments on that, Madeline?
Yeah, I love that question, Jason. And I think that's the question you have to ask every time you start to talk to a provider, because every provider out there is meeting with this AI message, and we don't really understand, is this really AI, is this not? It's absolutely the greatest question to ask and to get curious about and to be skeptical of, because you should be skeptical. There's a lot out there that just is not AI at all. That's not even automation, and that they're using that language. So to be able to, I think, step back and say, is this AI? It's certainly not the same AI as you probably see in other industries, but I think the question, even beyond that, is it ethical AI? Is it AI where we're being transparent about the algorithms with how our methodologies are to collect this data, where we're thinking about candidate consent, where we're able to really look at reducing bias, and is that the goal of how we're using AI? So I think those two questions, is this really AI, and start to get curious. I mean, if this is a startup that just started yesterday, probably not. You require a lot of data and a lot of insights to build good AI. And I think then, really question providers on ethical AI, because it's just so important. And, it's going to continue to be important. Europe's creating a whole regulation on ethical AI, and we're just going to see it more and more. So great question. Thank you.
Yeah, really good question, Jason. I know from an AI perspective, if you go to GDPR and the regulation in Europe, I mean, that's one of your limitations specifically in Europe, because you can't make automated decisions with non-permissible data. So it makes AI kind of irrelevant, right? In some cases, it can be interesting to watch. Definitely a good trend, and we'll keep a close eye on it. I know in the report, obviously we took a look at applicant tracking systems. We looked at background screening providers and CRM platforms. And the question came in about CRM, and I don't really have a good answer for this because I personally have never used a CRM for recruiting. It came from Alan. Alan, thanks for the question. Madeline, I guess the question is, have you ever utilized CRM for recruiting, or what's been the experience around using the CRM for recruiting?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, a lot of enterprise companies today have used it, or they're second or third generation buyers. And the challenge with the CRM, the CRM essentially is to help you nurture, create pipelines, nurture talent, engage with talent before they even apply. And, if you think about how a CRM is used on kind of a sales side, this is, a version that's similar, but focused on candidates. You're really able to create these talent pipelines. You're able to think about, are you communicating to different audiences? Are you tracking this type of communication? Are you nurturing talent? And there are a lot of different providers out there. I think what happens with a lot of companies is that they're very complex systems, and companies don't always have the change management or the expertise internally to be able to see that adoption. So it's an area where there's a lot of value, but it's a very complex area of technology. And really finding a partner, really figuring out internally how you're going to make this work is so important, even before you start to look at providers. Do you have, some companies have super admin roles that can help with that, recruitment marketing professionals. Look at kind of what you might need. And there's a lot of organizations that invest in these and are willing to share their experiences. And it's a great industry to be in, because people really share what their frustrations have been.
That's really what I was going to make a comment. We've hosted, when COVID first started, we started hosting HR coffee hours, and really because no one knew what to do, right? And so we tried to create a forum where we could just have a conversation and talk to your peers. I think one thing I've learned about talent acquisition in HR is they're good at helping one another and beyond normal. Like in my marketing world, I get some help, but not like when I see it in the HR and talent acquisition space. So collaborative, I think, would be a good recommendation there. Kind of goes along with Aaron's question, looking for, a good solution to help with their technological solution with diversity and inclusion. I would recommend the same thing, is talk to your peers, find out what they're using. We don't want to really position our HR at the table series to kind of provide tips on product and solutions, but, if you need some help, we're happy to help. But, again, talk to your peers. I think that's my recommendation. Maybe a couple more questions. I know we've got quite a few, and I want to go back maybe to one of the questions. So we talked a little bit about compliance with AI and some of those things. So this question also came from Joseph. Joseph, thanks for your question. What have you seen from an analyst view, Madeline? I think this is really relevant because you probably have good insight here. From an analyst view, in terms of regulation around using AI and talent acquisition technology, are there regulations on the dock in the US that, maybe people investing in TA tech should consider?
Not enough, unfortunately. I think there's different resources out there. There's organizations that kind of look at this and provide insights on what these regulations should be. I think what's happening right now in Europe will happen in the US. So in Europe, they're creating AI regulations that will be similar to GDPR compliance, and they're in draft format now for that, but it will really start to put pressure on vendors to be able to say, this is, this is AI, this is not ethical, and there'll be a lot. It will definitely impact talent acquisition when you think about interviewing, when you think about how decisions are being made on candidates. It's going to have a direct impact on talent acquisition. And what will eventually happen, and this is probably a few years out, is that we'll see those regulations in the US as well. So I think it's a great question. And the scary thing is not enough regulations here in the US market. It's kind of on you as an organization to decide how much you want to question providers, and then how to decide if you want to involve, legal teams that are looking at this as well. There's ethics committees that some providers have established to be able to address that, but definitely push providers on those questions, because you want to make sure that the provider you're using is truly AI and truly practicing ethical AI.
Yeah, and I think I would add on to that a little bit, Joseph. That is a really good question. I came from a background, a lot of experience in fintech, and it's interesting if you look at the regulations in Europe when it comes to financial technology. That chip on your card, that PIN was implemented 7 years in Europe before it made it to the US. So I really think we're going to see a couple more years before that becomes reasonable. But maybe to consider, if I'm investing in technology that I want to have 7 years from now, make sure it's compliant global. And I think you'll probably be in good shape. Well, awesome. Before we go to the next question, I want to kind of shift gears a little bit. We're about 15 minutes left here, but roadmap's always important. We like to try to provide a good roadmap when we can. Maybe a roadmap or a couple solutions, 2 or 3 solutions maybe, that would be helpful for our audience in selecting technology and building their TA tech stack.
Yeah. I think the first thing I would say when you're kind of thinking about this roadmap and you're thinking about what to do is look internally. I think it's so easy to get excited about new technology in the market, the different trends that we're talking about. AI matching has been a big theme this year. It's easy to get excited, but I think you have to take a step back before any of that happens and look internally. Look at where your organization is. Are you ready for new technology? What's working, what's not working, what's required when you invest in new technology, what type of change management. So take a step back first, really look internally, look at what's been successful and what hasn't in the past. Start to kind of take note of that again. So, to me, that's the first place to start. And then the second is start to get curious on the industry. And I think it's incredibly overwhelming. I give all of you so much credit because there are thousands and thousands and thousands of providers out there in the market. They know that you are in talent acquisition or HR and a decision maker, and you probably get calls nonstop all the time. And that can be challenging to figure out what you need, what's going to work, what providers to look at. But I think if you start to think about the market, what some of these dynamics are, and what's important for your organization into that, you can start to get curious on the market and figure out who the providers are and what would be valuable and important to your organization. And then the next piece I would say is going back to the ROI and integration conversation. Measure ROI early. Talk about ROI even before you've made an investment, and do the same for integration. Start to figure out, involve IT, what frustrations come up with integration, what isn't going to work, and what needs to work to make that happen. So look internally, start to get curious, and then think very early on ROI and integration. It doesn't have to be perfect, just start to have those conversations really early.
Yeah, I love the idea of getting curious. I'm probably way too curious personally. So, so now the hardest question of all, Madeline. We know in the back of one of those paintings, you have a little safe with a crystal ball, right? And if you take your crystal ball, what's next for talent acquisition? What's the next big thing? If you had to look, 2-3 years ahead, what do you think we're going to see?
Yeah, I think the first thing I'd say is I think we're going to see partnerships win. There's so much new technology. There's cool capabilities. There's providers out there in the market they're doing exciting things. But if they cannot partner with you on even a basic customer success level, then they're just not going to be able to provide any value. I think we're going to see the partnerships are going to win the day over and over and over again. So to be able to kind of really think about what's important in terms of company and product and their own roadmap is going to be really important. So I think we'll definitely see those partnerships win the day. I think we're going to start to see more interest in AI even than we do today, but also, to the question earlier, we're going to see some more education and questioning of providers out there. The other thing, and Ben, we didn't really talk about it, but it's such a big trend in this industry that we weren't even really talking about when the report came out, is the amount of investment that's happening in this market today. If anyone's kind of following the industry and this tech space, there's a lot of investment dollars being raised by these providers, where a startup could get 50 million, 100 million from an investor to be able to build out new product capabilities or build out a sales team or a marketing team. And it sounds really exciting. I mean, from an analyst perspective, that's exciting to me to talk about all this investment that's going into this little industry that we're all part of. But I would say it's something to be very cautious and maybe curious of, again, as a buyer, to be able to say, it sounds great, but just because a provider got $100 million doesn't mean I'm going to benefit as a customer. So I think you really have to start to look at this investment that's going into the market. Is this going to be sustainable? Are these providers going to be able to meet my needs as a partner, or are they just going to continue to push and push and push on me? And I think that that investment, I think we're going to see some change happening there. And I think you know, we do a lot of research on that too, and we ask, do companies care about that? And in the research results, it doesn't show that most companies do, but I'd say get curious on that as well. Ask how this money is going to be spent, what that means for you as a customer, how you're going to be impacted, what's the period of change that you can expect, and start to ask those questions. They're very appropriate, and if a provider can't answer them, then I think that's pretty telling as well.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And Madeline, I know you follow the space probably better than most. I've noticed recently there's been several you know, HR tech companies in that ecosystem, TA tech companies going public and opening their market, right? So there's definitely investment in the space.
Yeah.
Do you think, you know, do you think working with a company that's now going public, my experience has been typically, you know, you're working with a company and they're an SMB or they're, you know, a mid-market company, they get acquired, they go public. Typically the workflows kind of get ugly and it kind of becomes a mess until they've iron things out with the mergers and, you know, going public like that. Is that a risk that TA professionals should consider, or is that just?
Yeah, I think it's a great thing to bring up, Ben, because there's a period of change, right? If you're a customer or client of a provider, you want things to move along as they have been, and then all of a sudden you have this big change happen, and all of a sudden it's stop. Your experience is going to change because they're going to be focused on going IPO or an acquisition or whatever it may be, and that's, you know, that's going to impact you. I think looking at the retention of the customer success team is really important. You know, is your experience going to be the same? It really should be, and the provider is going to have to stay committed to that, even during this craziness that they're going to be going through, which lasts for a long time. It's not just a week.
Yeah, I think the last question here for our audience, I know we're coming up on our time here, from Frank. Again, Frank, thanks for the questions. Do we think that talent acquisition mergers will continue to be the norm? I'll let you answer, Madeline. I kind of have an angle there too, but I'll let you go first.
Yeah, and sorry, I didn't catch the last part, Ben. So do we think that mergers and acquisitions will continue?
Exactly.
Yeah, yes, I absolutely do. I think they've been going on for quite a while, but I think with the number of startups that are in this market, and it's hard to be a technology provider, and I think the number of larger providers that are looking to build out their ecosystem, I think we're definitely going to see more acquisitions in the space. Absolutely.
I do, and I think, Frank, that's a good question. And then, you know, again, with so many technology vendors on the place, I think that's going to continue to be a trend. So, you know, I think the important thing is making sure you're asking those questions as you're vetting out your solution. So, I just want to wrap up maybe with, you know, kind of last touches, Madeline. Again, thank you so much for coming and chatting with our audience. I want to thank iCIMS and Skill Survey for the sponsorship of this event. But any last comments? I think we're going to actually put the TA Talent Tech Buyer's Guide in the chat for our audience. You want to get a copy? The link's in the chat. I think it's there. So go get a copy. It doesn't cost you anything. We're just trying to provide information for you to make better decisions. Any last remarks, Madeline? Yeah, how do people that are on this call participate in next year's survey?
Yeah, so we'll start thinking about the survey, you know, in the next few months, I'm sure, and you know, we'll kind of put it out there on our site, and anyone can take it and participate, and we certainly try to make all those findings available. And please reach out if you have any questions. I mean, I think I just wrap up too, Ben, by saying thank you to you and to the Verified First team and the iCIMS team and the Skill Survey team for inviting me to be here. I think it's such an important topic, and I think this is just an industry I feel so lucky to be part of. I think it's an amazing industry. I think recruiters are amazing, and what you have to juggle with candidate experience and thinking about all these business pressures. Kudos to all of you. I know it's been quite a year, so thanks for joining.
No, appreciate it. And also for our audience, you can scan the QR code and get a copy of the guide as well if you didn't see it in the chat. And I just want to wrap up again. Thanks for our audience. And we're going to turn it off to what was called by Frank, the Wind Lady.
Hey everyone, it's me again. As Frank here mentioned in the comments, the Wind Lady. That's great, Frank. I love the nickname. Also, what a great discussion. I want to give a huge thank you to Ben and Madeline for preparing this discussion today. This is truly a valuable resource to our HR and TA community. I personally have learned so much from this discussion, and we hope you have too. Let us know and leave your thoughts on our post-webinar survey. Also, for our live attendees today, stick around for that post-webinar survey to redeem one SHRM and/or HRCI credit today. For any of those on-demand listeners today, check your email for instructions on how to redeem credit. We'll be sending out the webinar on demand in case you want to use this for reference or send it to a colleague. Also, check out our website at verifiedfirst.com for HR at the Table blog topics, where we narrow in on key points and break it down for you. Next, we're interviewing Marine veteran and Director of HR Operations at Beyond Trust, Walter Marquise, to discuss leadership lessons HR can learn from a Marine veteran. We hope you can make it, and we will see you next time.
See you guys.